Well, greetings everyone. I'm hoping that you can see what's going on today. This is April 5th of 2019. This is the first day of the new moon, of the green ears of barley, the feast of the month of Aviv, or Abib, green ears of barley. Today's the 5th, and the way that we're going here is by the Farmer's Almanac. It's the old Farmer's Almanac. It shows here the new moon that took place after midnight of the 4th, between the hours of the 5th, midnight to midnight on the 5th. It took place at 4:52 a.m. this morning. So about 12 hours ago, the new moon took place. So this here is necessarily the first day of the month. Now, here in the Farmer's Almanac, they like to throw confusion in there for some odd reason, but they've got the first day as the day after. It's as bad as using the crescent to set the feast by. It says from the new moon, you're to count. Okay, so this 5th day of April here is the first day of the month of Abib. Let's take a look at what Leviticus chapter 23 speaks to us about. It talks about these are the feasts of Yahweh. This is Leviticus 23 verse 4. These are the feasts of Yahweh, holy convocations, which you shall proclaim at their appointed times. Now, last month there has been some confusion with some people, but there are a lot that are too proud to accept the error to turn from it. They use the grain that was found on Mount Zion to set their feast by, which was wheat. Had nothing to do with barley. The commandment is to set the feast by the barley when it's ready, that it could be brought for the sheaf offering, which we'll get into in a moment here. But anyway, these are the feasts of Yahweh. They're not your feasts. They're not my feasts. Man should not set them except at their appointed times. So the 5th day of April began about 12 hours ago, the new moon. It was taking place. It only takes 2 or 3 minutes where the moon is completely dark. You can't see it. Don't look for the crescent. Start counting these, because it says here, after, in their appointed times. And then it says on the 14th day of the first month. Today is the first day of the month. So you count out 14 days at twilight, which is the 13th day at sunset. Okay, we don't use the Gregorian calendar for this. You can use it, but you can't use it to check your times and the dates, because at sunset, according to Yahweh's calendar, is when a day ends and another day starts. So on the 13th day of this month at sunset begins this 14th day of the month at twilight. So it's in the evening when you take care of these things. There's our postman. Anyway, this is Yahweh's Passover. Okay, it has nothing to do with the Feast of Unleavened Bread, except that it falls the day before the Feast of Unleavened Bread. Like it says, on the 14th day of the first moon at twilight. And there's so many out there think that our king became the Passover sacrifice. But, for him to fulfill the prophecies to become the king that he is now today, there were hundreds of prophecies that were written about him that he had to fulfill during his lifetime. As far as the Passover, our king never fulfilled it. He wasn't even killed on the Passover. Okay, and it's shown in the scriptures. I forget which book, but it's by one of the disciples. And they were talking of how Yahshua, okay, which of course, he would have never been out on the mount there to get arrested, with Judas bringing the pack down on him, if he was keeping Passover that night. Because after you go in for your meal at twilight, you're supposed to kill the goat or the lamb, and you're supposed to roast it in fire. You can't boil it, you can't fry it or bake it, and you can't eat it raw. It needs to be roasted in fire, with its entrails and everything else included. Of course, I don't know how we can do that now, and it's been tearing me up, and I keep going over and over, Yahshua, it's just a sinful thing that we're going to do this Passover, because I don't know of any animal that isn't blemished or whatever. I mean, we got the chemtrails and everything. The whole earth is defiled, it says in Isaiah 24. But we got to do our best with it. We got to keep it, with a belt on our waist, sandals on our feet, and, a staff in our hand. We're to eat it in haste. I'm probably just going to end up getting some, lamb chops or something. I don't know. It's an awful time of the year for me, because I know no matter what I do, I'm going to be sinning, and it sucks. But that's why we have our King, that he can forgive us. We're going to go through the steps the best we can on this defiled earth and hope for the best. Anyway, on the 14th day of the first month at twilight is the Father's Passover. Yahshua's up there on the mount 2,000 years ago, give or take, and he gets arrested with all his disciples that should have been in the house until sunup, because that's the commandment. We're not to come out until after sunup, and then we're supposed to burn up all the lamb and whatever was for the Passover into ashes, whatever was left over. So that is not a Sabbath day. You don't cook on a Sabbath day. There's no commandment ever tell you to cook. It tells you to be stoned if you do. Okay, so anyway, you've got the Passover. It's not a Sabbath day. As you'll see down here, the 15th day of the same month is the Feast of Unleavened Bread to Yahweh. And then he says 7 days you must eat unleavened bread. Now, on this 14th day, after, as soon as it starts, is a time you're supposed to eat unleavened bread also. You eat unleavened bread with the Passover. Don't be eating, leavened bread. It says to eat unleavened bread. It doesn't say you can't eat unleavened bread, but you might as well, maybe just get a head start on it. Now, after the sun comes up on the Passover, you go through your house, you check for any leavening you have, any yeast, any cream of tartar, or if you were using a box of baking soda to make things rise, instead of putting it in some in a baggie to use specifically for that purpose, to throw it out at Passover. As far as the yeast, it's great to pour it down your drain. It helps the septic and such. But you want to get rid of all the leaven, anything that makes bread rise, okay? You don't want any sandwiches found in your VHS players or anything like my children have done to me on several of these feasts. You never know till you plug in a tape of, a certain sermon or whatever you wanted and find out they had a peanut butter jelly sandwich crammed in there. It's always horrible. You always find something afterwards, but you have to look and get rid of it before this 15th day of the same month. So it's on the 14th. You'll want to make sure that all the leaven's out of your house. Clean out your vacuum cleaners, that sort of thing. Check the sides of your couches, the insides of the chairs and such, where crumbs or whatever, big enough that you can see. You're not looking for microscopic things. You're looking for bread that has been risen, or things that will make bread rise. And you want to get rid of all of that out of your house before 14th at sunset that begins this 15th day of the same month. Now, this 15th day beginning is the Feast of Unleavened Bread to Yahweh. 7 days you must eat unleavened bread. If you eat leavened bread, you're to be cut off from the people. Now it says, on the first day, this 15th day, the first day of the feast, you shall have a holy convocation. You shall do no customary work on it. Oh, reiterating, I wanted to go back to, when our King, became our sacrifice, when he sacrificed himself for our sins, yours and mine, it wasn't on this 14th day that it took place. Okay, he was arrested. He was brought in to the praetorium, where he was being whooped severely for your and my sins. And there were people on the outside of the praetorium. Read about it in your scriptures. You look it up and you'll see, they're outside the praetorium, and they did not want to go in there because they would be unclean and not able to keep the Passover. It says so right there in the scriptures. Our king wasn't killed on the Passover. He wasn't arrested on the Passover, and he didn't have a last Passover with his disciples except the year before. Okay, on this year, our king was arrested before the Passover, and he was killed before the Passover. And it shows it in the scriptures. Now, why some men twist that and try to say that our king became the Passover and making things out of our king that he never even proclaimed himself. Sure, he is the way to pass over because of his precious blood, to pass over from our past sins, but it's not, on the 14th day of Abib every year that this takes place. No, it's not so. It's when you discover that you've been sinning and want to sin no more, and our king does cleanse you with his blood, which has only taken place with 144,000 on the earth at this time, because they're the only ones that are going to keep these laws correctly. Everybody else is going to serve their own self or, their wives or whatever. We serve our king. Being virgins is, keeping from breaking these laws. That's how we remain a virgin. When you break a law or a commandment, then you're a whore. You've gone a whoring after the gods. You've gone a whoring after everyone else except Father Yahweh through Yahshua, his son. So, anyway, he's not the Passover, but on this 15th day of the first month at twilight is Yahweh's Passover. Yahshua is not the Passover. He wasn't even killed on that day. He fulfilled no prophecies concerning the Passover, other than when you repent, you pass over from death into life. Has nothing to do with this covenant meal. And if it did, then who is it that took Yahshua's blood and wiped it on the doorposts and the lintels? Who is it that roasted our king in the fire with his entrails and everything and ate him up that night, and then burned the rest of his remains in the morning, so none of them, was left over? These things are ridiculous. That didn't take place. He did not fulfill any prophecies, as a lot of false preachers want you to think. But anyway, it says, and on the 15th day of the same month, which is the 14th day, Passover at sunset, when it ends, begins the 15th day. Okay, and this is the feast of unleavened bread to Yahweh. 7 days shall ye eat unleavened bread. On the first day you shall have a holy convocation, and do no customary work on it. It's a Sabbath day. The first day of unleavened bread and the last day of unleavened bread. The same thing with the Feast of Tabernacles. And the Feast of Pentecost is also a one-day feast. It's a Sabbath. No matter what day it ends up on, it's going to be a Sabbath. And it says here, but you shall offer, these offerings here are what our king is taking care of for us in heaven, in the temple there. But it says, and the 7th day shall be holy, a convocation. You do no work on it. So you don't do it on the first day, nor do you do it on the 7th day. It is a holy convocation. Anyway, it gets down to here. During the feast, you're supposed to bring, in verse 11 of chapter 23 of Leviticus, he shall wave the sheaf before Yahweh to be accepted on your behalf. And when this is done, when our king does this, whether he's sending his holy Malachim or coming here himself, I don't know, doesn't matter, but he is gathering barley, and it's being offered in heaven to our Father on this day. It says here, on the day after the Sabbath, the priest shall wave it. And it's not talking the day after a Sabbath here for a 7th day, for the first and the 7th day of unleavened bread. It's speaking of the 7th day Sabbath. So on a Sabbath, between Friday sundown to Saturday sundown, the day after that, the priest is going to wave it, which is going to be on a Sunday. In fact, that's when Pentecost will always fall, is on a Sunday. Anyway, it says, and you shall offer on that day when you wave it, and all the other things that our king is taking care of. But I wanted to point out here that the sheaf offering is always going to be on a Sunday. Then you're going to count off 7 Sabbaths here. It says right here, okay, And this is where a lot of lunar Sabbath day keepers got screwed up, and they'll add 50 days after they count off 49 days, 7 Sabbaths, which they never come to either. And that's why they have to break these commandments, is in order to keep their own delusions. And I'm sorry if you don't like it, but it's the truth. And Yahshua is going to look at you and he's going to say, I never knew you. Get away from me, you who practice lawlessness. Because you have to know you're doing wrong keeping a lunar Sabbath when you take 7 of your lunar Sabbaths and they don't come out to 49 days. And this is exactly why, when I brought it up to these Sabbath lunatics, that it's going to be on a Sunday. It's got to be. There's 49 days when you count 7 7-day Sabbaths. 7 times 7 is 49. And then it says down here, from this part, after it's been waived on the Sunday, it says, and you shall count for yourselves from the day after the Sabbath. On that Sunday, you start counting, okay, from the day that you brought the sheaf wave offering, 7 Sabbaths. You count off 7 Sabbaths, and they shall be completed. Now, this is where they get goofed up, because no matter how you cut and dry it, you're going to come up either short or extra on the days, counting 7 lunar Sabbaths. It's going to be less or more than 49 days. It will never come out to 49 days because it's an abomination. It's a created thing by man. But here it says, count 50 days to the day after the 7th Sabbath. So if you've been counting the days, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, first Sabbath, okay, 7, and then you keep counting them, you're going to come up to 48, 49 would be your 7th Sabbath. 49 days. So then, from counting the 49 days, you simply count the 50th day. Count 50 days to the day after the 7th Sabbath. So what the lunar Sabbath keepers do is they say, oh, well, since, you know, there ain't no 50 day after we keep our 7 Sabbaths, you know, it might be 46, it might be 51 days, whatever their count is, because they don't believe in work 6 days a week and the 7th you rest. Some they have 9 or 10 days that you work and then you rest, and then you start doing it every 7th day. Each month they go through these things. But anyway, the 50th day is the day after the 7th Sabbath, and that is the day of Pentecost. I just wanted to point that out so that you'll know. I've also brought out some longer videos and such. I'm trying to keep this short. In the past, for the feasts before, I always try to give an alert. But anyway, here, about 12 hours ago, on this 5th day of April 2019, the new moon was spotted. This is the first day, not the day after is the Farmer's Almanac. So here we got day 1, and it started at sunset here on the 4th and ends at the sunset on the 6th. So this is the 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th, 9th, 10th, 11th, 12th. This is the 13th day of the green ears of barley, right here on this 17th day. So then, at sunset, this is the 13th day, at sunset begins actually our 14th day, which is Passover, right here on the 18th. It sunsets when you do your sacrifices and such, okay, for your covenant meal. You do your cooking and stuff after sunset. You know, there's a lot of people tell you, oh, you shouldn't eat after sunset. Well, why would it be commanded for us to do it if it's bad for you? So here we have Passover on the 18th of April, 2019. It's from the sunset at the 17th until the sunset on the 19th. And then there's a song David sang about the full moons and the feast. Well, normally every feast of unleavened bread and every feast of tabernacles, you will have a full moon on the very first day of those feasts. This day is also a Sabbath. Okay, from the 18th at sundown to the 19th at sundown is Sabbath, but at the end of the 19th begins the seventh-day Sabbath. Okay, so it's a double Sabbath. Now, on this day here, the day after the seventh-day Sabbath, which is on the 21st, and that's going to be the first, second, third day of the feast, okay, which doesn't matter. This is the Sunday during the feast. Here's the regular Sabbath, seventh-day Sabbath. This is the day our king brings forth the offering of the sheaf. And from here is when you go and count this 27th of April. This 27th of April will be the first Sabbath in the 7 Sabbath count. And then the day after say this was in May when it's going to take place, and the Sabbath comes up the 7th, well, the morrow after the 50th day is going to be Pentecost right here, not on this 28th. No, you can figure it out yourself. Count out 7 Sabbaths, go, like here's 1, 2, 3, 4 Sabbaths that they have in this month, okay? But these aren't part of the count. The count is from the 19th, the 20th here, the day after. The 27th is your first Sabbath. I'm not going to run through all that. We're already at 21 minutes, and I didn't want to be this far. That's your first Sabbath in the count of 7 Sabbaths. Then the day after, whenever it is, and I'm not saying it's on this 28th. It's not. There's 7 Sabbaths. It'll be, later. And the day after the Sabbath is Pentecost. It will always be on a Sunday. Okay, if you have any questions, please let me know. I'm going to let y'all go here. The snow just stopped coming down. It's been coming down all day. But I remember one Passover in Texas where it actually snowed. And here we couldn't check for the green ears of barley right here. That's why it's supposed to be done in Zion. Whether it's in Africa or whether it's over there in the Middle East where they now have set up and claimed it is, I don't know. There's new information coming out that we may be wrong on those things as well. That's what we do. We screw everything up, but we pray that we do our best, we do the best we can, and we put our trust in our King that He'll forgive us when we do screw up. It's disheartening. I pray that we be forgiven. But there's going to be a time and a place where we're going to actually be keeping the Passovers and all the feasts exactly as they're supposed to be done. A lot of it's imaginations of men added to these things. So do your best to please our King and don't go to making these other things on your own. That was my bread timer. I have some buns in the oven. I'm going to make some hamburgers for Sabbath. And we only got a short while left before we got to get rid of the leavened bread. So I figure I'd make up some nice yeast rolls, have us some hamburgers, and I haven't figured out what else yet. Maybe potatoes and gravy or something. I don't know. But anyway, I love y'all. I hope that you'll keep this Passover and the Feast of Unleavened Bread, 2 totally different occasions. Our King did not become your Passover in that manner. He did from when you desire to repent, when you come to understand you've been wrong, lied to all your life, and you do repent bitterly. That's when you pass over from the death penalty you was under unto, the kindness of our King and His forgiveness. His, as people like to say, grace, which is actually 3 dancing naked daughters of Zeus who would dance naked together. It's not grace. The Greeks didn't know how to translate it. It should have been a pardon and acquittal. And that's what our King is. He's a pardon and an acquittal of all our past sins. But once we put our trust in our King, we're never supposed to go back to the sins again, not even new ones. We're supposed to learn the laws and the commandments, put our trust in our King by obedience. And that's what worship means, is obedience. Okay, with that, I'm done. I love y'all, but I want to get this out as quick as I can. And may your feast be wonderful, as well as the Passover too. Shalom.